A strange girl appears. You trudge through the mist-laden corridors of Hogwarts, the echo of your own footsteps blending with the distant creak of ancient floorboards. And then you see her, a figure slightly out of place, almost as if the air itself bends around her presence. Luna Lovegood glides past, her radish earrings catching the dim candlelight, tiny orbs of brass swinging like pendulums, keeping time with some secret rhythm you can't hear. You notice the way her gaze flickers between the walls and the shadows, not quite observing, yet seeing everything, like she's privy to a story the rest of the castle isn't telling. You probably won't survive this without questioning your own notions of normalcy, because the first thing you realize is that Luna doesn't adhere to the ordinary rules of Hogwarts social gravity. She orbits on her own plane entirely. There's a subtle scent of parchment and peppermint lingering around her, though you swear she hasn't been near the library or the kitchens, which sparks the first of many tiny questions in your mind. Are these hallucinations of smell a side effect of her, or just your imagination? Historically, Hogwarts students have long complained about mysterious drafts and sounds, catalogued meticulously in the 17th century student records, which makes you wonder if some of those reports weren't entirely inaccurate. And here's a fringe tidbit. Luna once claimed that dirigible plums have consciousness, a notion scholars dismiss, but some enthusiasts insist on documenting. She smiles faintly at no one in particular, and you find yourself wanting to follow her, yet feeling that the laws of common sense are dangling somewhere behind a cloud of rack spurts buzzing gently in your ears. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. You glance around, realizing the corridors seem quieter, yet heavier somehow, and you notice that her shoes leave no marks on the stone floor, as if gravity itself takes a brief holiday in her presence. The idea of ordinary feels like an insult, and you begin to imagine Hogwarts not just as a castle, but a stage set for invisible dramas, some dictated by moonlight, some by whispers, some perhaps by Luna herself. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The mystery of her father. You follow Luna, not too closely, because she seems to have an innate radar for followers, but close enough to feel the pulse of her quiet curiosity. And it's impossible not to wonder about the wizard who raised someone so singular, so exquisitely attuned to both the magical and the inexplicably odd. Xenophilius Lovegood, her father, is a figure whispered about in the corridors of Hogwarts and in the pages of the Quibbler, a man whose eccentric publications make even seasoned professors raise an eyebrow. Yet there is brilliance hidden in every peculiar assertion he prints. You imagine him in his cluttered study, surrounded by stacks of parchment, half-finished enchantments, and jars labeled with cryptic contents that defy conventional magical taxonomy, thinking perhaps that a jar of whoopers in mid-song is the same as a musical symphony frozen in amber. There's a scent of ink and ozone, an undertone of the kind of curiosity that is slightly dangerous to conventional minds, but perfect for shaping a daughter who sees the world in dimensions others cannot perceive. You learn almost accidentally that his influence is subtle. Luna's perceptive habits, the way she questions what most accept without thought, and even her penchant for collecting oddities like dirigible plums and rackspurts, all trace back to his methods. Methods some claim border on the heretical, though historians debate how much was intentional pedagogy versus serendipitous chaos. Fringe theories suggest he may have dabbled in experimental memory charms to instill curiosity in his daughter without her realizing, a notion dismissed by the ministry, but whispered by those who study magical lineages. You watch as Luna flicks a page in the Quibbler, not reading aloud, yet absorbing every odd illustration. And it becomes clear that she inherited not just his intellect, but a peculiar lens for perceiving reality, one that filters conventional wisdom through layers of whimsy and gentle skepticism. Every fact she recalls, every unexpected observation, feels like a thread pulled from her father's tapestry of unusual teachings, and you realize that understanding Luna fully requires understanding him, or at least accepting that some questions may never be fully answered. Her father's presence lingers in small ways, in the sway of her movements, in her ability to see what others overlook, and in the subtle rhythm she seems to keep with the universe, a beat that may be his own creation. And yet, the scholarly debate remains. Are these traits inherited, or the result of a highly idiosyncratic environment? Perhaps it is a combination, and perhaps it is impossible to separate the two, which is both frustrating and fascinating in equal measure. You start to notice how she glances at the ceiling beams, as if listening for whispered advice, and you cannot help but marvel at the depth of a character shaped by a mind so unconventional it borders on prophetic. A mind that taught her not to fear the improbable but to catalog it meticulously. There is humor here too, as you imagine him scolding a whooper for singing off-key, though the image is almost unbearably charming, and yet it underscores a truth. Luna's quirks are inseparable from her lineage, a fact both grounding and exhilarating. Quirks that defy logic. You trudge along the uneven stone corridors of Hogwarts, the torches flickering in your peripheral vision, and Luna appears again, casually balancing a stack of books while discussing the migratory patterns of nargles, as if they were as real as the shifting shadows around you. Her eyes glint with a mischievous intelligence, one that turns mundane observations into curious puzzles. The way the staircases occasionally shift, the whisper of parchment when no one is nearby, the smell of damp stone that always seems to precede some inexplicable discovery. You notice how she collects small, invisible entities, rackspurts, whoopers, crumple-horned snorkacks, each labeled meticulously in her mind, and somehow she convinces herself and the lucky few who follow her that these creatures deserve attention, a consideration that most wizards dismiss with a scoff. There's a fringe theory that Luna can perceive magical vibrations imperceptible to the average witch or wizard, a claim both fascinating and contentious among scholarly circles, who debate whether her abilities are innate, learned, or possibly enhanced by her father's unconventional experiments in magical perception. You can't help but notice the humor in it, watching her try to capture a rackspurt by gently waving a hat at it, muttering incantations that sound more like lullabies than spells. And yet, against all logic, she often succeeds, leaving you questioning the very fabric of reason. There's a smell of ozone and old parchment in the air, and you realize it's not coming from her books, but from some magical residue, perhaps a byproduct of her eccentric charm work, or simply the unseen effects of being attuned to things others can't detect. Historically, Hogwarts has tolerated odd students before, but Luna's blend of intellect, imagination, and gentle absurdity seems to straddle a line no one has officially codified. Professors whisper about her, students gossip, yet no one can truly say what her potential might become. And you can't help but chuckle at the quirky absurdities, her radish earrings, her periwinkle robes, her insistence that nargles may be responsible for misplaced socks, which somehow reinforce the truth that she sees the world differently. And that difference, though often invisible to others, gives her a perspective both strange and enlightening. Scholarly debate aside, you begin to see patterns. Her oddities are not random. They are small threads weaving a tapestry of perception that challenges conventions, encourages curiosity, and quietly, persistently, reveals the magic in mundane observation. You follow her gaze to a crack in the stone wall, where she gestures with a delicate finger and whispers. Sometimes the wall listens, and for a moment, you wonder if perhaps it does, if Hogwarts itself is aware of those who perceive its hidden stories. Her presence, a balance of whimsy and insight, creates a rhythm that demands you adjust your own sense of logic, teaching without instruction, coaxing you into the liminal spaces between reason and wonder. And there's laughter here, subtle and warm, as you realize that understanding Luna requires more than observation. It requires participation in her peculiar dance of imagination and reality, a lesson both delightful and disconcerting. Friendship in unlikely places. You trudge down the shadowed hallways of Hogwarts, your footsteps echoing softly against the stone. And once again, Luna is there, seemingly untethered by the usual social maps of the school, flitting from one curious corner to another, drawing the overlooked and misunderstood into her orbit like invisible magnets. You notice the way Neville Longbottom, usually awkward and self-conscious, leans into her quiet guidance, how Ginny Weasley tolerates her eccentricities, yet slowly learns to trust her keen perception, and how even the most skeptical students, those who dismiss her insights as nonsense, begin to see that something valuable thrives in her company. It is in these small, unnoticed connections that her strength manifests. A whispered encouragement in the library, a shared secret about an uncharted passage in the castle, a quiet laugh that bridges the distance between the ordinary and the extraordinary.
Historically, Hogwarts has documented the formation of unlikely alliances, but Luna's relationships defy patterns. They are forged less by house loyalty or magical prowess, and more by empathy, curiosity, and a willingness to perceive the world through multiple layers of possibility. Fringe observations suggest that some students claim to sense an aura of protective magic whenever she intervenes, though scholars debate whether it is genuine enchantment or simply the confidence she instills in others. You follow her as she crouches by a window, examining a cluster of mist-drenched leaves, and suddenly a quiet student you didn't notice before edges closer, mimicking her careful gestures and asking the simplest of questions about Rackspurts.
There's a charm in watching these connections blossom, the kind of understated heroism that textbooks rarely capture, the courage to offer friendship where it is least expected, to notice the unnoticed, to value intellect and imagination as much as strength or lineage. You can't help but smile at the tiny humorous moments, the way she introduces a newly discovered magical creature to a group that barely believes in the ones they know, or the earnest confusion of a teacher trying to follow her logic without ever truly understanding it. And realize that these interactions, subtle as they are, shape the social ecosystem of the school in ways no decree or policy ever could. Her gentle insistence that everyone has value, even the quietest, most overlooked students, resonates like a whisper through the corridors, challenging assumptions about popularity, influence, and the nature of belonging.
And there is an unexpected depth here. As you watch her foster trust and camaraderie, you begin to understand that her peculiar worldview, once a source of amusement, is the very lens through which meaningful connections emerge. A reminder that friendship is often forged in the smallest, most unlikely gestures. You feel the warmth of this realization as she turns toward you with a serene, knowing smile, offering a glance that conveys both welcome and challenge. To see the world as she does is to discover new possibilities, to redefine loyalty, and to embrace the strange, beautiful complexity of human connection.
Fringe anecdotes claim she once spoke to a thestral as if it were a long-lost friend, a feat skeptics dismiss but some enthusiasts document, leading to ongoing debate among magical scholars. Is her affinity an innate gift, a product of training, or something more ineffable? You follow silently, noting the way her eyes catch glimmers of light, shadows that dance like spirits, and the gentle sway of branches that seem to bow to her passing. Humor creeps in as you imagine her lecturing a startled bowtruckle about proper etiquette while it clings stubbornly to a branch. And you realize that even in the most perilous environments, she treats the world with gentle absurdity, a blend of scientific observation and whimsical imagination. Luna leads you to a clearing where the moonlight spills over a cluster of silver mushrooms, their caps shimmering almost unnaturally, and she crouches, explaining in a matter-of-fact tone how these fungi are rumored to amplify magical perception, though even she admits no wizard can confirm the effect conclusively. Her quiet bravery is unassuming. She doesn't charge forward with wand at the ready, but rather listens, observes, and engages with the creatures and the landscape, revealing truths that most would miss in haste or fear. You feel the tension of the forest soften under her gaze, each whisper of wind and distant hoot of an owl transforming from menace into narrative, a story she interprets with clarity and curiosity. There is a warmth in witnessing her affinity for hidden life, a reassurance that not all danger is dire, and that some mysteries are meant to be approached with patience rather than panic. And as she turns toward you, smiling faintly, while brushing a stray leaf from her hair, you sense the truth of her approach. The world is both stranger and more alive than textbooks allow, and courage is often quiet, attentive, and woven into the fabric of noticing what others overlook. Shadows from the past. You trudge along the familiar yet unsettling hallways of Hogwarts, your mind half occupied with Luna's effortless composure, and you notice a shadow flicker in her expression, a fleeting moment that reveals a depth of memory and experience hidden beneath her ethereal demeanor. The past, it seems, is not just a series of dates and events for her. It is a tapestry of loss, eccentricity, and moments that shaped her in ways subtle yet profound. You begin to sense the weight of her mother's absence, the quiet echo of grief she carries without complaint, and the intricate patterns of family influence from a father whose brilliance teetered on the edge of obsession and eccentricity. Historically, wizarding families have often been defined by their legacies, from the Black lineage with its rigid traditions, to the Weasleys with their chaotic warmth, and Luna's story sits somewhere in between, a blend of eccentric freedom and personal sacrifice that invites both admiration and scholarly inquiry. Fringe tales suggest she sometimes communes with lingering spirits in her family home, a habit dismissed by academics yet documented by her father's meticulous notes, sparking debate about whether such interactions are genuine or manifestations of highly attuned magical intuition. Humor peeks through the melancholy as you imagine her explaining to a perplexed first year that sometimes grief smells like lemon drops and occasionally requires a dirigible plum to balance the mood, a metaphorical alchemy only she could devise. You notice her pause by a window, gazing at the night sky, seemingly reading the stars as if they whisper secrets about who she is and what she has endured. And you begin to understand that resilience is encoded in the minutiae, the quiet insistence on noticing what others ignore, the playful engagement with the impossible, and the unshakable belief in a world larger than immediate perception. There's an almost scholarly fascination in the way she integrates her experiences, turning them into a form of quiet magic. Memory and imagination intertwined, a method both practical and enigmatic. You sense the invisible threads connecting her past losses to her current abilities, a network of subtle strength that empowers her to navigate social nuances and hidden dangers with a grace most students lack. The balance of humor and sorrow in her life is striking. One moment she is gently teasing a roommate about misplaced socks. The next she is lost in thought, contemplating forces both magical and emotional that most would find overwhelming. Scholarly debate would insist that Luna's coping mechanisms, her eccentricities, and her whimsical insights are all interconnected, yet no theory fully encapsulates the way she moves through the world. Resilient, observant, and quietly luminous. You follow her gaze to a flickering candle in the hall, imagining how even the smallest light can cast long shadows, and realize that Luna's brilliance, shaped by both joy and grief, illuminates more than her immediate surroundings. It casts a light on the unseen, the misunderstood, and the extraordinary subtlety of human and magical experience. Whispered legends and oddities. You trudge along the quieter wings of Hogwarts, the echo of your footsteps mingling with the soft whispers of centuries-old enchantments. And Luna is ahead of you, pointing with a delicate finger at a tapestry that seems to ripple when no one else looks directly at it. She begins recounting stories of half-believed myths, odd creatures, and forgotten spells with such conviction that you can't help but lean closer, straining to catch every nuance, every glimmer of a world just beneath the veil of ordinary perception. Historically, Hogwarts has long been a repository of arcane knowledge, but much of it remains undocumented, and Luna thrives in these liminal spaces, where the lines between recorded fact and oral legend blur into possibilities that spark debate among scholars and skeptics alike. Fringe tidbits abound. She claims that crumple-horned snorkacks are partial to moonlit puddles, a detail dismissed by professors but fervently noted by a small circle of devoted Quibbler readers, raising the eternal question: what is real? What is imagined? And does it truly matter if magic perceives belief as substance? Humor bubbles through the strange gravity of the moment, as you watch her explain that a mischievous Cornish pixie once stole her favorite radish earrings, only to return them with a polite bow, which somehow feels entirely plausible in this corner of Hogwarts. You notice the way she handles the magical oddities with care, touching them as if they were living entities and whispering names that might be nonsense to the uninitiated, but resonate like music to those who have learned to listen. Her observations, while whimsical, often illuminate truths that ordinary students, and even some professors, overlook. The subtle interactions between enchanted flora, the patterns of ghostly passage, the way moonlight bends differently in certain rooms, all of which suggest a hidden order in the apparent chaos of the castle. You realize that following Luna is less about walking in her footsteps and more about attuning yourself to the frequency at which she perceives reality, a rhythm that blends logic with instinct, empirical observation with imaginative hypothesis, and scholarly curiosity with eccentric wonder. There is a quiet courage in her willingness to question orthodoxy, to catalog, observe, and engage with legends dismissed by the mainstream. And you feel a strange thrill as you realize how much of Hogwarts exists just out of reach, waiting for someone like her to notice, to document, to give form to the fantastical. And as she turns toward you, a faint, knowing smile on her lips, you feel the pull of curiosity as both invitation and challenge. To follow Luna is to confront the uncomfortable possibility that the world is stranger, richer, and more alive than conventional wisdom allows. and that belief, observation, and imagination are threads you must learn to weave together. Courage in the unseen battles. You trudge through the dimly lit corridors of Hogwarts, the air thick with the scent of old stone and lingering candle smoke, and Luna glides ahead with that unshakable calm that seems to repel both the mundane and the menacing alike, her wand poised not with force but with quiet intention. You notice how she navigates dangers others overlook, the silent pressure of a shifting staircase, the faint hum of a concealed spell, or the subtle shift in shadows that would make any ordinary student freeze. But she moves with measured attention, relying on wit, intuition, and a touch of whimsical magic that turns fear into curiosity. Historically, students have faced threats both mundane and magical, from rogue magical creatures to dueling clubs, yet few possess Luna's particular blend of perceptive courage, one rooted not in physical bravado, but in awareness, patience, and subtle ingenuity. Fringe scholars argue that her ability to detect imperceptible magical disturbances could border on an innate sixth sense, though debate persists over whether this is inherited, learned, or a rare blend of both. You feel the humor in her methods as she sidesteps an imaginary nargle, muttering instructions as if conducting a symphony only she can hear, and you can't help but smile at the gentle absurdity, which conceals the precision of her focus. Observing her, you notice that bravery does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers, bends with circumstance, and unfolds in the quiet confidence to act when others hesitate, to notice when others ignore, and to trust one's instincts in a world that often rewards conformity. There is a peculiar rhythm to her steps, the way she adjusts to unseen obstacles, the way she assesses danger without being paralyzed by it. And you start to see courage as a mosaic of intelligence, humor, empathy, and magical perception rather than mere recklessness. Scholars debate how much her bravery is influenced by her lineage versus her experiences, but you suspect it is the interplay of the two that creates a uniquely resilient character, one whose interventions often tip the scales of fortune without drawing attention. You realize that even the smallest actions, blocking a wayward hex, gently redirecting a misbehaving creature, or offering subtle guidance to a frightened peer, represent battles that are never chronicled in textbooks, yet shape outcomes profoundly. There's a whimsical undertone too, a reminder that fear is not eradicated but reframed, that the absurd can be weaponized into clever solutions, and that those who seem most eccentric often wield influence far beyond their apparent social footprint. As Luna turns toward you briefly, her expression serene and unwavering, you understand that the unseen battles she faces are continuous, requiring constant vigilance, empathy, and creative thinking, and that courage, in its truest form, often manifests in these quiet, thoughtful interventions rather than dramatic gestures. The way she blends attentiveness with imagination, seriousness with subtle humor, leaves you with a profound sense that heroism is as much about perception as it is about action, a lesson delivered softly yet unmistakably in the rhythm of her presence.
The unexpected hero. You trudge through the echoing corridors of Hogwarts, the moonlight casting long, wavering shadows along the stone walls, and Luna moves ahead with that same unassuming grace that seems to both belong and not belong to this world, drawing your attention to subtle details that others dismiss as irrelevant. She intervenes in moments unnoticed. A faintly trembling first year struggling with an invisible boggart, a misdirected spell heading toward a group of unsuspecting students, or a whisper of misinformation circulating among the younger houses. Historically, the school chronicles feats of heroism in elaborate accounts of dueling victories or the vanquishing of dangerous magical beasts, But Luna's heroism is quiet, indirect, and profoundly effective, unfolding in spaces and ways that rarely make it into the official record. Fringe stories claim she once single-handedly redirected a herd of rogue thestrals without disturbing a single branch, a tale dismissed by most but secretly admired by those in the know, sparking debate over whether her interventions are intuitive, magically enhanced, or both. You can't help but notice the humor threaded through her methods. How she persuades a disobedient creature with polite conversation, or how she somehow convinces a stubborn, enchanted object to cooperate, always with an expression that blends earnestness with the faintest smirk. Watching her act, you begin to understand that heroism need not always be dramatic or loud. It can reside in subtle observation, in the courage to act when most wouldn't even notice a problem, and in the patience to guide outcomes without seeking recognition. Scholars debate whether her quiet influence is a product of nature, nurture, or sheer magical attunement. But the tangible results are undeniable. The misdirected spells are averted, the frightened students soothed, and the strange creatures, half imagined, half real, move safely along their paths. You observe the rhythm of her heroism, which combines empathy, cleverness, and an almost imperceptible authority that commands respect without ever demanding it. There's a gentle absurdity, too, in her insistence on labeling every odd creature, cataloging minor phenomena, and speaking to things most would dismiss as imaginary. Yet these quirks enhance rather than diminish her effectiveness. She teaches without a single lecture that courage is nuanced, that heroism is often invisible, and that one can profoundly shape the world through quiet interventions and careful attention to details others overlook.
As she pauses to adjust a fallen scarf, or to whisper a reassuring word to a nervous student, you realize that these small, unexpected actions accumulate into a legacy more enduring than any single dramatic exploit. Luna, the unconventional, the eccentric, the overlooked, reveals that being a hero does not always require thunderous applause. Sometimes, it simply requires seeing, understanding, and acting in ways that others cannot, leaving the world subtly but indelibly better for it. Fringe enthusiasts argue that the creatures she interacts with, rackspurts, crumple-horned snorkax, and the faint traces of unseen forces, exist partially because she perceives them, a phenomenon that fuels debate over the relationship between belief, observation, and magical reality. Humor enters naturally. She gestures at a rogue dirigible plum flitting overhead as if scolding it for tardiness, a spectacle simultaneously absurd and mesmerizing, highlighting how the mundane and the magical coexist seamlessly in her world. You realize her courage, empathy, and perceptive genius are not only traits, but instruments, tools that enable her to shape outcomes subtly, protect the overlooked, and connect threads of magic, mystery, and human emotion that others miss entirely. There is a scholarly curiosity here. Can such abilities be taught? Or are they the product of a rare alignment of lineage, environment, and temperament? Observing Luna, it becomes apparent that the question itself is part of the answer. Her world cannot be replicated by mere technique. It requires a willingness to embrace uncertainty, to see patterns where others see chaos, and to act with quiet confidence amid ambiguity. She pauses at a glimmering pool, catching reflections of the moon and stars, and you sense a bittersweet melancholy, the awareness of how few will ever perceive the world as she does, yet the satisfaction of being entirely herself in every thought, gesture, and glance. There's a soft, almost imperceptible joy in watching her interact with the unseen, balancing realities with imagination, the whimsical with the scholarly, the humorous with the profound. And as she turns toward you with a faint, knowing smile, you understand the truth of her existence. Magic is both everywhere and nowhere, anchored not in spectacle, but in perception, in curiosity, and in the courage to notice. Her world is now yours to witness, a delicate lattice of wonder, melancholy, humor, and insight, leaving you contemplating whether magic was ever external, or if it simply resides in those brave enough to see it. As the corridors fade behind you and the moonlight bathes the castle in silver, you feel a quiet reverence, a soft invitation to explore, imagine, and perceive the extraordinary in the everyday. And in this moment, you understand that Luna Lovegood is not merely eccentric. She is an emissary of possibility, a reminder that unseen truths shape the world as profoundly as the visible, leaving you both comforted and inspired by the subtle, enduring magic of her life. Now take a deep breath, relax your shoulders, and allow your mind to linger gently on the glow of this world as it slowly, softly fades, leaving you calm, reassured, and quietly delighted by the beauty of perception itself. The night stretches on, quiet and enveloping, and you feel the gentle weight of the castle's history settling around you like a familiar blanket. You notice the soft echo of footsteps that once wandered these corridors, the whisper of leaves brushing against the forbidden forest, and the faint hum of magical vibrations that Luna has guided you to perceive. Your breathing slows, in sync with the gentle rhythm of the world she inhabits, and a comforting thought lingers. Even in the unseen, in the overlooked, there is beauty, order, and quiet courage. The warmth of understanding her perspective softens any lingering tension, and you allow your imagination to drift through the corridors, the moonlight pooling in hidden alcoves, the shadows stretching with a gentle grace that seems almost deliberate. There's a softness in the absurdities, a quiet laughter that accompanies the thought of dirigible plums, rackspurts, and whispered secrets of the castle. And it blends seamlessly with the deeper resonance of courage, resilience, and empathy she embodies. You feel a calm reassurance, knowing that the world holds more than what meets the eye, that quiet interventions, subtle courage, and perceptive observation ripple outward, shaping outcomes and nurturing connections in ways large and small. Let your mind linger here for a few more breaths, letting the soft, gentle hum of Hogwarts, of Luna's world, of unseen magic, settle like dust in the corners of your thoughts. Slowly, comfortably, release any tension in your body, imagining it carried away by invisible threads of starlight. Let the serenity of this place, the blend of wonder, insight, and soft humor wrap around you, comforting and quieting your mind, preparing you for rest. And as your thoughts drift, allow the subtle glow of magic, curiosity, and the extraordinary hidden in the ordinary to fade slowly into dreams, leaving you calm, inspired, and softly smiling.